Hello.
Coach Dean, this is Elias. I'm here with my co-host Mike. Thanks for being on.
Hey, man, what's happening?
Not too much, man. A lot more happening with you than us. That's why we're excited to talk to you, Coach.
I know, man. I wish it wasn't, but you know what? I'm always in the center of controversy.
You are. You're just a lightning rod, man. It's all your fault.
You know what? It seems like that sometimes. Like, why am I always messing up so bad that, and it affects other people? That's what I feel like. Such a bad luck charm.
Well, you're a great luck charm as a coach. Probably has nothing to do with luck at all. And I actually do want to talk to you about the fight itself before we get into you being in the middle of stuff. That is something very specific I want to ask you about. But because you're actually in a very particular way, seemingly in the middle of Tyron Woodley and Dana White going after each other, and that's got to be a rough situation. But first, I want to talk about the fight. It's a congratulations, number one, on your guy Tyron Woodley retaining the title. Absolutely. Want to talk about the risk that is the unique risk that is fighting Demian Maia. As a quick review, Demian Maia was not just, the number one contender, having won, I believe, 7 straight fights. He's taken down every so-called superior wrestler he's ever faced in his MMA career. He took about 5 seconds to toss international wrestler Chael Sonnen on his head. He's taken down John Fitch. He's taken down Jake Shields. He's taken down everyone. He's a great takedown threat, and he's also, obviously pretty dominant on the ground. He's done things like, even when he doesn't get the takedown, pulling half guard, which is like suicidal in a grappling match most times, to say nothing of a fight where you can be hit, and he's been successful there. What, just so people understand a little bit, whatever your guys' strategy and game plan was, talk a little about the threat Demian Maia poses, not just with his takedowns, Coach, but also with failed takedowns where an opponent sprawls, stays on top of him, and then Maia's able to get an underhook and pull that half guard.
Yeah, Damian Maia has the unique ability to utilize a lot of jiu-jitsu in his approach to taking people down, and that's more so. And that's he's very good at that. I mean, he's the one who has faith in his jiu-jitsu, and as long as he's got a finger on you, he can manipulate you and off balance you using like his jiu-jitsu skills in order to transition back into wrestling. So, I mean, he's really, really, really good at that. And that was something that we had to prepare for very specifically. And we brought in guys who were good at specific areas, and we were able to kind of, reverse engineer rather, his approach in order to stop it. Between using, Ben Askren and my buddy Antonio Carlos Jr. with his jiu-jitsu ability and Ben Askren's wrestling ability, we were able to kind of reverse engineer Damian Maia's approach and just shut down his whole game.
What was the overall plan, Coach, to approach this, even though T. Wood came up as a wrestler, as a high-level grappler? Was it to basically be the striker, keep things on the feet, wrestle in reverse, and then obviously connect more than your opponent on the feet? But was it basically that, like, let's keep this standing?
Yeah, the weird thing about like the camp was that obviously we wanted to keep it standing, but with a 5-week camp we had to really focus a lot on not getting taken down and end up in bad positions, and being able to deal with if you do get taken down, and then also dealing with Damian Maia off of his back. So we spent probably a majority of our camp dealing with issues that never played out in the fight. So yeah, honestly, we did. We never really got a chance to show what Tyron was capable of in those areas. So it really came down. So we didn't really even work on. I mean, we worked on a lot of striking, but I mean, we weren't dealing with a kickboxer, so we didn't have to like come up with a lot of strategies on dealing with certain strikes. That just came with the territory. But we spent a majority of our camp working on situations that actually never happened in the fight.
Speaking of striking, were you surprised at all that, or maybe I saw things, but were you surprised with Damian Maia's willingness to stand and in certain moments trade a little bit? Like in his last fight against Jorge Masvidal, another ATT guy, he looked pretty out of his element and pretty like he looked really nervous standing a lot, and more so I guess than I thought than in his last fight when he fought T. Wood, and he actually landed some good punches because of it. Did that surprise you at all?
No, it didn't actually, because I felt as though With anybody, when you can't take a guy down, you have to utilize other resources. And I felt as though that he's not totally clueless on his feet, and we saw that in the Chris Weidman fight. In fact, I thought he outstruck Chris Weidman. So that was something that we were careful of to go. All right, he's a great jiu-jitsu guy, but and ignore the fact that he does have two arms and two fists, and he will try to punch you, and he will try to kick you if he has to. So we did work on that as far as a part of our game plan. So I mean, again, it was just a very difficult fight to prepare for when you're dealing with a guy who's so strong and so sophisticated in his approach to what he does. It wasn't an easy camp, especially being a short one. We had to really buckle down and dig deep and spend countless hours. And I know, and for me, it wasn't nothing because I'm sitting there watching, but like for Tyron, I know it had to be just miserable and frustrating to have to deal with, having guys like, Juan Cornero Jucao hanging on his back for round after round and dealing with things like that.
And how much, this is it was his fourth fight in under a calendar year, fourth title fight at that matter. How much of, you talk about the grind and just preparing for Maia, but the grind of all these camps back to back to back.
Part of it, again, selfishly, I can say I don't mind it because honestly, like I like going up to, like we did most of the camp down here in Florida, but for the other camps, we spent a lot of time in Milwaukee with Duke Rufus, and so I like going away to camp. I can't, I'm selfish in that fact that I like going away to camp. I like hanging out with Tyron. I like getting the crew together. We get a crew and we bring everybody out. We have a good time. So those are okay. It's not that bad for me, but for Tyron, I'm sure it's just miserable. I mean, you're constantly under pressure, to fight, and you're trying to defend your belt, and that there's a target on you, and interviews and media. So it's hard on him, and I think he kind of deserves a little bit of a break now.
A lot was made of Tyron's takedown defense percentage going into this fight. Like that, ironically, that was touted by the UFC heading into it. Afterwards, not so much, right? But not many people have actually shot on Tyron before it. This time, he may have set a record for most successful takedown defenses in a fight ever, any organization. That's when we really, if we're honest, that's a real form in MMA, because this is not boxing, it's not kickboxing. That's a real defensive mastery. Has that been overlooked in your mind the last couple of days since the fight with all this criticism?
Absolutely, it's been overlooked. I mean, I'm almost not sure why this witch hunt has begun on him. I don't know what it is, why the fans and, the haters want to, attack him. I mean, when I look at his performance, regardless of what people thought of it, they go, it's boring, he's a boring champion. But when I look at his performance, I thought it was masterful, and I think it's something that we should appreciate. If we really want to look at MMA as a legitimate sport, we should appreciate what he did and go, all right, he may not be, this crazy, wild, reckless Justin Gaethje type fighter, but he's a smart, intelligent champion. He's able to adapt to different fighters and do what he has to do to win. And he did it against two guys, not only this fight, but even against Wonderboy. Mm-hmm. Wonderboy was a guy who went in and was knocking people out, using this different style. Tyron we were able to make the adjustments and win that fight. Then he comes back and fights a completely different opponent, completely different. He's able to make the adjustments and also win the fight.
I see the fight the same way you do. I appreciate the thought that went in. Like, he obviously recognized what Maia's good at and found a way to neutralize it, and he executed flawlessly. But he's getting kind of, I don't want to say beat up, but he has naysayers that are being particularly vocal on social media and whatnot. How's he handling all this right now?
If it was a year ago, I think he would have been bothered by it. But nowadays, it's something I think maybe after the Robbie Lawler fight that, and this is something that we talked about, like, because I've been with him for a long time, and I remember he used to be bothered by the social media stuff, and I used to steal his phone so he couldn't go on it. But I think nowadays, I think he's okay with it. I think he's learned to embrace, the haters and just go, you know what, it doesn't matter. I can't prove nothing to you guys. All I can do is make my money and provide for my family. And I think that's more so what he's concerned with now, is just, making his money, trying to create a legacy, provide for his family. And he's not so concerned with what people are saying, especially after this fight, too, because we were both pretty proud of his performance.
As long as they're talking about you.
Yeah. I mean, that's a good thing, really. I mean, they might hate him, but it's a good thing that they're talking. I mean, it could be worse if he was a champion and everyone's like, who is that again? I don't know who that is.
So fans hating on a fighter are one thing. Your boss hating on you, your promoter doing the opposite of promoting you, the person who has some impact on how much you get paid, when you get paid, what you get paid, to do things like provide for your family. Clearly, that's another thing, right? And that's a tough thing. Tyron talked a little bit on Ariel's show earlier this week and demanding an apology. I've seen some response from you already about that, Coach. I want to ask you this. You obviously Tyron's longtime coach, one of his coaches, and you're also close enough with Dana White to do the looking for a fighter, looking for a fight show that you do with him. We've had you on here before. You've talked about having a good time with that and with him. It's a tough spot for you. How sad and angry might it make you feel to hear Dana White continually bash and even lie about Tyron Woodley? And when I say lie, I'm not trying to be hyperbolic. In the press conference, Dana White afterwards, after 214, came out and gave just false stats. Like his friend Donald Trump came out and gave false stats. Said this is the fewest strikes ever thrown in a title fight. That's wrong. That's not correct. That's verifiable. George St. Pierre, Dan Hardy threw less in that one. Matt Hughes, Sean Shirk, less one than that. What do all these fights have in common? Also all-time greats at welterweight. That's just the welterweight division. So he's coming out and saying just false things about him. That's on top of things like after Tyron's fight, the first fight with Wonder Boy, one of the most thrilling fights we've had in recent MMA history. Dana White bashes T. Wood and said, go out and win a fight. Don't get a draw. He bashes an amazing performance there. He told Tyron to, quote, shut up and fight when Tyron talked about racism, when he talked about fighter treatment. And now he's lying and bashing him again. How do you process that? How are you dealing with that?
Well, one, I have to separate my relationship with Dana as far as him being the boss and then him being my friend. Now I have to separate that. So, and I understand, like, as a boss and I respect his position. Clearly, I do. And he has a duty to the fans, And sometimes I don't even know if Dana really fully believes, what he's saying. Sometimes I don't know, but I do understand he has a responsibility to the fans to provide a show for them. And if they don't like it, he has to answer to them. You know what I'm saying? So I understand that, and I get where he's coming from. And at some level, too, Dana's still a fan, too. Like, he's still a fan, and I think he's more fan than he is as far as, like, being an expert on the sport itself. I think he's more fan. So, so in that sense, I do believe he might believe some of it and maybe actually think that Tyron is a boring champion. But for me, I have to separate that and not look at it like, oh, man, this is bad. I just go, hey, listen, I understand you got a responsibility to the fans. Do what you got to do, say what you got to say. But at the same time, like, I have my duties, too, as a coach and as a friend of Tyron Woodley, and go, you know what, I have to make sure you're winning this belt, because I promise you this, if Tyron loses that belt, he's going to the back of the line.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So we gotta keep it by any means necessary. But I also think this, too, is that there's some unrealistic expectation of Tyron based on his history. Based on the fact that he knocked out Jay Haran with the quickness, knocked out Robbie Lawler with the quickness, Josh Koscheck with the quickness. Now people see that and go, man, this guy is a beast. He should just walk across the ring and just punch a guy, and they're going to fall out of they're going to fall into the third row. That's an unrealistic expectation. So now when you see a guy with that type of physical capability fighting these smart fights, they almost get upset with him. They're almost like, man, what are you doing? Why are you fighting like that? We know you're capable of more. But at the end of the day, these opponents, they're ready for Tyron's right hand. They're ready for what he brings to the table. So he has to bring something else to the table.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I hadn't thought about that at all, about him, being these unrealistic expectations. It does kind of cue in to what I was going to ask, because you're talking about Coach. Maybe Dana White's just more fan than anything. It definitely could be. I personally, and this is speaking only for myself, no one has to agree with me here at all. Certainly not the two of you here now with me, but
We'll see.
But I find it, I don't think it's just about being a fan. I think Dana White, you can draw the criticisms of Tyron Woodley starting directly when Tyron Woodley starts talking about his pay, directly when Tyron Woodley starts talking about race in America, race in the sport, and that's when the criticism starts. You have to have an agenda or be an idiot to criticize Woodley, Thompson, one, even if all you care about is blood and guts in a fight. And that's exactly what Dana White did. He criticized Tyron Woodley's performance in that fight. That's absurd. So I think a lot of it has to do with other stuff. And what I'm curious here, and you can comment on that if you want, but you don't have to, but I'm curious as well, like, you talk about people being okay with T. Wood being a beast, going there, knocking people out with a quickness. But now they're not okay with him being a cerebral, tactical fighter when he needs to. And I can't help. Maybe I'm way off base here as a person of color, but I can't help thinking, wow, isn't that interesting how we're okay with this black He-Man being a beast, but we're not okay with him being a cerebral, tactical fighter, the type of attributes which often get praised in sports. But he's not being praised for them when it's Tyron Woodley.
Yeah, I mean that is absolutely true, and we'll catch heat for that. We'll catch heat for saying that. Oh, you're bringing race into this. But I mean, it is true. It's a perception that may be subconscious to some people, but it is true. I mean, when he's going out there and he's fighting these, tactical fights, and you're looking at him and you see this He-Man of an African American athlete, and he's just fighting a tactical fight. You're like, what is he doing? Like, it's not common for us to see that. And it's true, and I fully believe that with my heart. That has something to do with it. Now, again, whenever you bring up race in this country, people always assume that you're saying that it's going to be this race war, this riot. But we have to call it like it is. We have these perceptions of each other and these prejudices of each other that we're just kind of conditioned to. We're very conditioned to believe certain things about what we see from people. And that's one of them, like when we see, black athletes, that's why I used to see it all the time. And I remember when I was fighting, every time they would come up with my things, explosive, great athlete. You know what I'm saying? Like, it was never really super smart. Right. I mean, that's just the way it was, and it's just the way it always been, and it still is that way.
Do these guys, does Dana ever talk to you about T. Wood? Does T. Wood ever talk to you about Dana?
No, not really. Not really. I mean, I try to keep that separate because they're always, those two, they're like, like cats and dogs, man. But Tyron has that relationship with a lot of guys, actually. And I try to keep it separate because I don't want to get in the middle of that. But they're kind of always going at it, and sometimes they're good, sometimes they're not. And when they're good, they're really good. And when they're not, I'm like, I don't even want to bring this guy into this. But at the end of the day, like, Dana really likes Tyron. I know he does. He really likes him. And I know he really appreciates what Tyron does because Tyron does do a lot for the sport. I mean, he's very outspoken. He's not afraid to get in front of the camera and promote himself or the show. He just he just wants what he wants. And the point you made up a little earlier, I believe that to be true too, is that, if there is any blame on him, it is, he can make these claims sometimes and say he's the greatest in the world and that, this, that, and the third, and people really want to see him prove it and go out there and be this crazy savage. But again, it's an unrealistic expectation.
He's also said those things and maybe done more to prove them than somebody else who's extremely popular for saying the exact same things.
Right. Talk about Conor McGregor.
Yeah, which isn't necessarily fair to Tyron. But and it's weird to hear, to hear that like he can be cats and dogs with somebody. Having seen Woodley like with his Rufus Sport teammates, he's so beloved by his teammates. Like people in the gym really rally around him.
Yeah, it's his personality though. He's got a very, and he'll be the first to tell you he could be stubborn at times, and he wants what he wants and when he wants it. And but when you get with somebody, and when you get with somebody else who wants what they want when they want it, again, Dana White, and some other very powerful figures in the game, when they get together and they both want the same thing, it's always a clash. But but they're professionals about it. They'll argue and they'll go at it back and forth. But at the end of the day, it's all love. Because at the end of the day, everybody wants the same thing, and that's to succeed and make money.
And I wanted to talk more about the smart and the technician and the game plan. I think being able to game plan really well isn't necessarily something that's praised in MMA in general. I don't think people are just going to go in and do what they do. They don't necessarily think that people are going to alter their approach for specific opponents. in other sports, like in football, you could, and I used this analogy on social media while defending Tyron Woodley this week. If it was a 6-3 college football game in the SEC between like Alabama and LSU, people would think it was an all-time classic, a defensive struggle. You know, this great game. It could have been boring. There are no touchdowns, only field goals, but people would love it. And I think there's like this understanding. Because you grew up, you played it when you were young, your dad watched it, there's a greater understanding and appreciation of the game.
It's hard to do.
Right. So is this the thing, like MMA is just so young that there's fans who are continuously getting into it every year for the first time and they just don't know what they're witnessing or how to appreciate it?
Well, here's what we have to understand. You know, and this is one thing we all have to understand is that MMA is not boring. It's not boring. It's just, like you said, it's what people understand. Now, people can watch a football game and be entertained by it, even if it's, 6-3. People can watch golf and be entertained by that. You know why? Because they can go out there and do it.
Yeah.
Because they can go out there and do it. But how many people will actually get into a fight? Not many. You know what I'm saying? And if they do get into a fight, it's a street fight. So that's what they understand. They understand a street fight. And if they won't get into a street, they still only understand that street fighting barbaric mentality that they're living vicariously through the fighters. So they don't want to see a fighter being able to think things through or have a game plan and a strategy. They just want to see guys just go at it and go crazy because that's what they understand. Like the last time they got into a fight was somebody stole their parking spot, so they went out and just grabbed them by their shirt and punched him in the head. But that doesn't happen in MMA. You know what I'm saying? It can't happen in MMA. So that's where the disconnect is between fans and where real fighters want the sport to go.
I guess when the guy steals your parking spot, you're not going out there thinking I'm going to be a smart fighter against this guy as I express my rage.
Yeah, and they're not they're not a trained dude. You don't need to be super smart, right?
Right.
So no, absolutely. Before we let you go, Coach, we're talking about current events, stuff that just happened, really important stuff, and we really appreciate your honesty and candor with all of that. But you do so much. What's next for you? Where can fans follow you? Anything from podcast to radio stuff to coaching. What's going on next for you?
Well, we just wrapped a podcast. Me and Tyron did, kind of talking about all this stuff. So,
The Morning Wood.
you get that firsthand from his mouth on what he thought of it on the Morning Wood show. So you listen to that. But tomorrow I'm actually filming a short film with a guy of mine named Steve Darren, who actually did a feature over that just released over the summer.
Cool.
Actually a few months ago. The feature was called Shadow Fighter, but he actually wrote a short film that I'm filming with him tomorrow.
Wow.
Other than that, I'm still doing my improv stuff and still coaching fighters and just trying to stay in the groove and keep moving forward.
Dean Thomas, the man with 26 hours in a day. Get all that time.
And I don't sleep, man. I stay working.
Well, Coach, thank you so much for your time. Everyone, make sure you're following Dean Thomas, all his projects. Make sure you're listening to The Morning Wood. Hear it directly from the man himself. We're really glad that you took some time with us again. It was an honor to have you on.
Thanks, Coach.
Thank you, fellas. I appreciate it.
Take care.